Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Molten Modular. Today we're looking at the Wavefonix W614 6U, a fabulous modular curated by Wavefonix, a British firm who have been making classic and vintage style Eurorack modules. The W614 contains a whole raft of different stuff, curated, put together, designed to work together nicely with oscillators of both analogue and digital style, filters, envelopes, modulation and utilities in abundance. It's a sort of system that you could drop into an existing studio and it would just offer a range of interest, of modular tones and modular possibilities. It could be a big chunk of stuff to expand on an existing system, just to bring in a bit more of that classic, basic, modular goodness. But whatever way you look at it, it's a smart, nicely designed, beautifully encased system. Now you may recall I did a video on the W314, which was the smaller sibling of this, just a single row, and that contained like a single voice worth of modular. It's beautiful, worked really well. A lot of people commented on the case though, in that there was kind of gaps at the top and the bottom and it just didn't quite look right. They've fixed that. And this is an example of the case that they have now. The W314 just has it in a single row. And it's beautiful. It's weighty, but not too weighty, and just feels lovely, looks lovely, as do all the modules. I mean, it's interesting that there's variation in them. They're not perfect. They're not all perfectly come off a production line. You can tell that they are boutique in the way that their front panels perhaps slightly vary a little bit. It's like you get this sort of vintage feel from it purely through the imperfections, if you like. Which, is that a dangerous thing to say? I don't know. I'm sure they try very hard to get them absolutely perfectly identical. But I've been spending the last few days thoroughly enjoying playing with this, patching it together, discovering sounds and different ways of doing things. It's interesting how when something restricts you, that you have to find new ways of being creative. You know, often when I'm patching together, I'm then reaching for other things and patching it into other stuff and bringing other stuff in, always sticking perhaps with the more familiar. Whereas in here, I get sort of pushed into using things in different ways, in experimenting, using things that I don't necessarily get on with, like ring modulation. I don't really know how to get anything sensible out of that, but I'll give it a go. FM similarly, or changing the way that I do modulation, voltage controlled modulation, having to cope with not having all the bits that perhaps I would want, because that's the interesting thing, is that you're never going to find a system like this which has absolutely everything that you want in it, because there are different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking. And when we build our own modular system, it's in some ways organic, because you go, oh, okay, I've got a couple of bits and then I want to add to it, oh, I'm going to add this, and it gradually spreads. But it's probably more than likely sporadic. It just goes off in one direction, then off in another, and then back in another way. And with a system which is built for you, you can take that out of the equation. So you're no longer bumbling along trying to think, oh, what should I get next? What should I get next? You just have this and deal with this. And that brings rewards of its own. But of course, you can plug it into whatever you like. You can pull it all out and replace it with other stuff if you want. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to stick with this, within the confines of this. I might add an effect or two, we'll see, but largely looking purely at what the W614 has to offer. Now, pricing is always something that's interesting that people like to think about, and for this is in the region of $27.50, I believe. Now that makes it significantly cheaper than something like the Make Noise shared system or the Erica Synths Techno system. And while those systems have quite a specific intention, this perhaps has a broader appeal because it's less focused on creating a particular sound or a particular style, and is really giving you a bedrock of classic, basic, modular functionality that it's often easy to miss when you're looking at the more esoteric modules and more, oh, and something that does interesting digital things and then turns it inside out and then doubles it and then granulates it and such like and so forth. Whereas here I've got oscillators, analog oscillators doing their analog thing. I've got a digital oscillator as well, modulation, utilities, interesting bits and pieces, an 8-step sequencer. So in some ways you could see it as a little bit basic, but that I think is perhaps its strength, in that it does all of these things really, really well. Now, normally when I talk about modular, I'm talking about a single module, and I make a right meal out of telling you all about it. I spend hours talking and plugging it into things and patching different things up. I'm not going to do that with this because there's too many modules to do that with. It would take days. So instead, I'm going to patch up a load of patches to hopefully demonstrate what it was that I pulled out of it, and perhaps give an inkling as to what might be possible in perhaps your more creative hands than mine. Before that though, I will just take you through what the modules are and point out some of the things that occurred to me during using it. What was good, what was bad, what worked, what didn't work, that kind of thing. But if you just want to know what I think about a system like this, then it's been an absolute joy to play with. The quality of it overall is exemplary. It feels good. The sounds you get out of it are interesting and different and characterful and quirky. You can push it in lots of different directions, and it teaches you a lot about what different utilities and modulators can be about. So I'm very grateful to Wavefonix for lending this to me, and it is a loan. I'm not getting to keep it or anything, so I'm having to, unfortunately, give it back. So kicking it off, we have a MIDI interface. So this wasn't in the 314, although I believe it is available now in that module. And you simply plug a MIDI cable into here from a keyboard or something, and you get pitch and gate and CC out and other bits and pieces. A buffered multiple, lots of fun there, although there's 4 lots of them, which gives you a lot of scope. There's also a passive one further over here. But this becomes useful because you actually have 4 oscillators, 4 analog 3340 oscillators here, set up as 2 dual oscillators. There's been a little bit of a change to this since last time I had a go on one, and that's that the 1 volt per octave input is now normaled to the second VCO. So you've got these 2 dual VCOs. So you can just put in one tune, one bunch of pitches in here, and you control the 2 together without having to put another one in here. Although, of course, you can do them separately because they are completely independent. They don't tune together, though. You have to do that by hand. So there's a bit of tuning, and these knobs I find are not my favourite thing. I mean, if I was going to be keeping this, I'd probably put some larger knobs over the top of these, because it can often be difficult to see exactly what they're pointing at. But from the oscillators, you get a sawtooth, triangle and square wave with pulse width modulation and FM input, either linear or exponential. They sound fat, they sound lovely. You can use them as a 4 oscillator synthesizer coming straight from your keyboard, wired into here through the mult, bing, bing, and you're off. Or you can use them as 4 independents or groups of 2. You know, your versatility here is brilliant. You've got sync as well as you can do detuning by tuning them very close to each other. There's lots and lots of fun to be had with these 4 great sounding oscillators. And then you have the 1847 wavetable digital oscillator. It's got a single wavetable of a bunch of waves that you can sweep through and morph through with this knob, but it also has a sub oscillator which has weird different things in it, and they don't morph, they leap, and that gives a whole other feel to that. And they have separate outputs, so you can treat them and mix them separately. It's all very CV controllable, so you can morph bits and pieces and get some really interesting tones. And it's quite interesting because there's only the one wavetable in here, that you're not endlessly searching for different sounds. You're just using what it is that it presents you with. It's got bit crushing as well, which is really nice, and a bit of glide. Now all of this needs to be mixed and put together, and here we have the 6-channel linear mixer. When I first saw this on the W614 system, it was 6 inputs into a single output. And since I did the review on the 314 and spoke about it and talked to Chris at Wavefonix about it, he's now split the outputs. You've got 3 into one, and then the further 3 into a separate output. So if you like, you've got 2 lots of 3-channel mixers, or you can use it as a 6-channel mixer, of course. But that really helps out because of the amount of oscillations that you've got. So if you're going to bring a couple out from one of the dual oscillators into there, and then 2 out from the wavetable into the second side, you're going to treat those differently. You don't want it all to go piling through a filter together. So that splits those off nicely, although it's still not quite enough, because you could take 4 outputs from the analog oscillators quite easily, and another 2 from the wavetable, but your split is for 3. So the amount of output possibilities that you have and this 6-channel mixer don't quite exactly perfectly match one another. But hey, then we've got this lovely low pass filter. You have a choice of filter you can put in there from Wavefonix. They've got a couple, I think, and this is the 3320. Sounds brilliant. Single input, single output, but 2 lots of FM control and 1 volt per octave. Then you've got a pair of envelopes, a regular one and a voltage controlled one. And then at the end here, you've got a noise generator, which becomes useful for sample and hold, which we'll see in a minute. On our second row, we've got a quad VCA, which does your VCA bits and pieces. And then you have an envelope follower, which is not something that I've actually used, I have to say. But if you wanted to plug a guitar in and extract gates and envelopes from that, then absolutely you can. Next up is a ring modulator. I'm never quite sure what to do with the ring modulator, but there we go. It's very exciting, and you can get ring modulator type sounds by stuffing lots of oscillators into it. The dual sample and hold is really good, very, very useful, either using that with the noise generator or to pull things out of the sequencer, pull extra notes out. Then you have a clock divider, which of course is essential. One thing I would say that is perhaps missing is a clock itself, because you need a clock to run the sequencer. Now I can use a square wave from an LFO and use that as a clock, and that's ultimately what I did. Or you can take a clock from the MIDI interface and plug that into here. So this is very, very useful. I kind of just wish it had its own clock built in, and that would save you from having to take either an LFO or to use something from elsewhere. Next up is the 8-step sequencer, which is one of my favourite little sequencers. It's so playful, so easy to run about and to use, and just fits the system brilliantly. I'd quite like to have 2 or 3. I mean, I did in the patches, you'll see I use an external sequencer often in order to drive more stuff, because ultimately, although you do have 2 outputs, you've only got one thing running. Whereas I tend to find myself wanting to run everything. But actually that's quite a good point, because it's not necessarily designed as a system that should be running everything at all times. It gives you lots of different choices, lots of different things. You don't have to use it as a groove box to try to sequence your entire life out of this one system, which is what I tend to do in the patches. And you have to take that into consideration, because I just like layering stuff up onto stuff and just try to make everything all work all at once, and that's not necessarily what you would use this for. Then you have some utilities, attenuation, a pair of switches, the passive multiple, a whole bank of 4 LFOs, which is really nice, which give either triangle or square, and you've got different levels of speed that you can switch between. And then over here you've got a voltage controlled low frequency oscillator, which has variable wave shape as well, so you can get some good ramps and bits and pieces going on with that. Then you have a stereo panning mixer, so whatever it is that you've created will come into here into 3 inputs and let you pan and set levels, which you've also got headphone outputs and 2 outputs at the bottom. But then there's another audio output which gives you another output which I find slightly confusing, because I've kind of already got all the output stuff I need here, but then there's another one, I guess, to give you jack outputs, or perhaps this is your rack output level here, and this is giving us a bit more of a line level. And so I guess that's why that sits there. So I think overall that the module choice is really interesting, and it's pushed me into different places that I wouldn't have normally found myself, perhaps. But also there are things that perhaps I would change, perhaps, given the opportunity. Like, for instance, I'd like another filter, because I quite liked using the 2 oscillators together or separately, and I would have liked to have run them through different things, which of course means that I probably need more envelopes. But that's the thing, it cascades. As soon as you start making changes into things within the restrictions of a 6U case, there are compromises you have to make. You can't have everything. You can't have it all in there. I mean, perhaps to fit in another filter, I would have pulled out the audio out if, assuming the stereo panning mixer, I could take one of those headphone outputs as a line output. I'll take out that. I didn't really use the dual switch or the attenuator because most of the things around here have attenuation on their control voltage inputs. So if I was to lose those three, that would probably be about the width of another filter and have that in there. Also, the mixing was, as I say, slightly frustrating because you end up with not being able to do everything. But as I say, it's not necessarily designed to do everything all at once. But, you know, you've got 4 channels of VCA here, but you've only got 3 inputs into your stereo panning mixer over here. So I guess that's 1, 2, 3 sound sources. It's just that because the wavetable has 2, it has 2 outputs, as each of these will have. It's mixing all of that together that becomes not perhaps as smooth as you'd like. But again, as I say, it just depends on what you're using and how you're using it. I think in my patches, as you'll see, I tend to want to stuff everything in. Everything. I want everything going all at once. And that's perhaps not the best way to use a system like this. It perhaps better complements a larger system, or you would use it for, you know, for putting out one of those oscillators and doing something interesting with that. Taking just the wavetable, doing something interesting with that. You don't necessarily have to cram it all together. Like I have been. But, you know, it just depends on how you like to play. So there you are, the Wavefonix W614. I hope you enjoy my patches. I hope they give you some idea as to what could potentially be possible with this, particularly in someone's hands that are far more creative and imaginative than mine. So there you go. I hope that was helpful. And in the meantime, go make some tunes.